things correctly? Oh no. So, what are the neat things about Soren? Kierkegaard means churchyard in Danish. Kirk is church and gard is yard. So why is the family named Churchyard? Because the community let them rent the house or live in the house that was in the churchyard. Being a fan of horror books, like Stephen King's books, I picture, this, house being one of those, haunted houses where, you're in the basement and all these dead people are falling down from the walls, scary. But also, Kierkegaard's father was depressed. He believed as a child he cursed God because of his miserable life, and that for the rest of his life God cursed him, and that as a result of that all of his children would die young, and they did, actually. And they all did. And who were the children? Well, his first wife apparently died, and he very quickly married the maid, and the children are from the maid. So, who was Soren's mother? I believe it was the maid. But in any case, the father, of course, very depressed, convinced that the family is cursed. And that sounds depressing, doesn't it? Growing up with a father that thinks the family's cursed because of what he did, etc. And they're Lutheran, which is also depressing. I don't know. I've got friends who are Lutherans. They're very depressed people. It's because Martin Luther led a revolt against the Catholic Church, and his views were really depressing. In many ways. You can look that up and see what kinds of things that resulted in a very, very strict kind of situation. There was a movie that I saw when I was at Middlebury College one summer for a Russian course to kind of refresh my Russian skills one summer. So the Army sent me there for a 9-week course. While we were there, a couple of students and I decided we wanted to go and see a movie up in the only town in near Middlebury that has a theater. I can't think of the name of that either. Middlebury. Well, in any case, we went there, and it was an Ingmar Bergman film about these two kids growing up in a family in Sweden, but they were Lutheran. And the father was very happy, the whole family is very happy, full of life. The kids are growing up with all this life all around them. So rich, such a rich family with all kinds of furniture and nice things and parties and happiness. And the father died. And by necessity, the mother needed to marry someone, so she married the Lutheran bishop. And they move into his house, and his house has nothing. Just two maids that are dressed in gray and very mean. Everyone's sitting at the table just eating gruel, and the discipline is absolutely strict. And he uses physical discipline, which is totally different than the previous. They were very rebellious kids because of the way they were grown up. But now, instead, they have a bishop for their stepfather who is going to be beating them for every little thing. And this is Lutheran. When I think this is a movie that Bergman made to convince us this is what this side of the state thought. Bishop. I don't want to ruin the end of it for you, but basically the kids both hope that this a bishop is going to die, and in fact, his mother is living in that place and can't get out of bed. She reaches over and knocks a lamp, which is at the time a flame, and you get the impression from the way the movie did it that the boy actually motivated her to make that motion, so that it was the boy's fault. And of course the house caught fire. They got out with their mother, but the bishop tried to save his mother and caught fire with her and died. And so at the end of the movie, I told you I wasn't going to ruin it for you, but at the end of the movie they're sitting back in the full house with all the joy and all the dancing and everything, and as he's sitting there, all of a sudden the bishop, the ghost, bumps his shoulder and says, "I'm going to haunt you for the rest of your life." Typical Swedish film, you know. Well, he grew up and of course was going to become a Lutheran priest, right? As he's going to school and everything, of course, he ends up becoming familiar with Hegel, and becomes a Hegelian. At the same time, he also falls in love with Renee, and he ends up planning on getting married, but he ends up having second thoughts and ends the marriage 2 weeks before the date. Why, right? This is an interesting problem for him, and becomes the focus on people talking about what he was like, why he would cancel the wedding, not really explain to her why. And when she ends up falling in love with someone else and marrying them 2 years later, he's furious. How could she have loved me and yet marry this other guy? But he writes a short story. And what makes him famous, by the way, is his writing. And by the way, if you notice, I say at the beginning of my slideshow here for Kierkegaard, studying the following philosopher may be dangerous for your mental health. And I'm serious about that. People read him, love his writing, and get so depressed themselves. The more you read him, the more depressed you will get. Unless, of course, you read him with a non-biased view to study, well, how historically did he react to Hegel? And what makes him so depressed? Well, as a Hegelian, a student at the time, he comes to realize what we've been talking about lately is that all of culture, all of our traditional beliefs, all of these things that we believe in general, even science and everything else, has evolved from human experience and is created by humans. So our conception of God, like Feuerbach says, is essentially our invention. We've invented God. Why? Why did we invent God? To make us feel tiny by comparison? That's pretty dumb. Why did we do that? Right? It's not like somebody actually really met God somewhere, walking on the water. How did Jesus walk on the water? Did he kind of go, or did he kind of heel toe it? Whoa. Yeah. How did he do it? Well, here's my take on the whole walking on water business. Jesus knew how to swim. He went like this. People saw him that didn't know how to swim, and they said, he's walking on water. Why? Because if you look up Hebrew from that time period, they didn't have a verb for swimming. So what he was doing was walking on water. So it's a translation mistake, actually. No miracle. He knew how to swim. It's like this, Peter. Do this. Oh, okay. Hey, I'm okay. Teach them how to swim. That's just me. Sorry, You can look for, Hebrew for swimming. Fish swim. They have a verb for fish swimming, but they never use it with regard to people. So it's people didn't swim, I guess. Since the traditional stories are all man-made, and you can't believe any of them, why are we here? What gives value to anything? It's actually a very depressing stage. When you hit that, you realize nothing is believable from these old narratives. The gods didn't exist. Nothing special about us compared to other animals. In fact, if you were in Denmark at the time and you looked around a lot of the people, I bet they weren't that much different than a lot of the animals. Probably still isn't in some ways. So the feeling that we're special in the universe and the earth is no longer the center, if you were an educated person, you don't have Sigmund Freud saying that you're not really in charge of yourself yet, so that's not a problem for him. He's absolutely convinced he is in charge of himself. But as a result, he feels like he goes through stages. So once you come to understand, thanks to Hegel and the others of his time period, Schelling will be important. In fact, his teacher in Berlin was Schelling, because Hegel's dead by then. So by the time he goes to Berlin for only 4 months, and he hated it, the main reason he hated it was because there was no place to pee there. It was illegal for you to pee in the street, but they didn't make toilets, public toilets. So you had to be either in your hotel or in your apartment, or, in the school building or in the museum. You were just out strolling around. There was no legal place for you to go, etc. Kind of an odd thing. But by the way, he's there almost the same time, I think he is the same time as Karl Marx is also studying with Schelling. Schelling was Hegel's roommate in Tübingen, became the famous philosopher first, and then when Hegel wrote his work, everyone shifted their view to thinking that Hegel was the newest upcoming philosopher, and Schelling was furious. For one thing, because he disagreed, but he lost, basically. But guess what? Hegel dies first. And then after that, about 2 years after Hegel died, they replaced Hegel at Berlin with Schelling. And Schelling is now the teacher that everybody goes to, and he's the one teaching people what Hegel was saying. And of course, he's also arguing that his philosophy is superior to Hegel's, which, by the way, it isn't. So when you look back at it, you feel like, well, he wasn't really the thrilling teacher that Hegel was, although Hegel was boring to listen to theoretically, but his ideas were thrilling. But when you listen to Schelling, his ideas are not as thrilling, and even though he's a little bit better of a speaker, he was actually not that much better as a teacher. And yet he was there, he was the one everybody went to listen to, because he was the one. He was the current knowledge provider to people. And both Karl Marx and Kierkegaard attended and listened to him. And as a result, they both rebelled against Hegel, although they rebelled in opposite ways. So Kierkegaard comes out of it and feels like Hegel's emphasis on the zeitgeist, or the social soul of a community and its impact on the individuals, is overdone. I'm much more free, and this is where existentialism comes from, the idea that you are a free agent Jean-Paul Sartre says, you're condemned to be free. Paradox, right? You can't help it. You're free whether you like it or not. By the way, Sartre, and I'll throw Sartre in a little bit here because we're doing existentialism. So Sartre, being and nothingness, l'être et le néant, being and nothingness. Argues that I am what I am not, and I am not what I am. You've got this Hegelian view that in order for me to have self-consciousness, there's two of me. The subjective side that's having an experience, and the object for that experience, myself, which is not the subject, but is actually a conceptual set of schemas and things that I think of, that's me. I'm in this group, this social group, I'm in this social group, I'm in this social group, I have these social characteristics, I want to be in this social group. Billionaires, no, that's not going to ever happen, right? You know, all these, there were 150 new billionaires in the United States just last year. 15% of them were women. Just one of those little news facts, right? But you know, so I've got all these conceptual things that I think of as myself. I'm not actually any of them. They're all conceptual schemas, none of which are really true. But I think of them as defining me. But I'm the subject having this experience, thinking about that. So I am not what I am. And I am what I am not, because that's all I got. As a result, I am the negation between the two of them. I'm the nothingness between being the subject who's thinking of itself as all of these things, and all of these things that are not really the subject. As a result, there's a gap in what I am, and that is negativity, the not. And thanks to that, I can say no. Starts when you're in the terrible twos, right? You say no, right? Where does that come from? This gap, this nothingness, this is Sartre, right? Lies coiled in the heart of being like a worm. Very negative, right? And yet at the same time incredibly powerful, because as a result of that, scientifically, there is a break in the chain of causality in myself. And as a result, I actually have the freedom to choose. This is where it comes from. This is where being human is godlike. We're not forced to behave according to cause and effect. I have free choice. And if you have this kind of relationship with yourself, which if you're educated enough that you think of yourself as a self, you have all these conceptual schemas that you think of as you, and you know that you're not really, right? You can't help but be free. You always have to